Hi, folks. We are here entering the Christmas season. It is full of bright hopes of happiness as we think about the Savior and His birth and the things He did for us. We're so grateful for Jesus Christ, and we can't say enough about the important mark that He left on all of our lives. He taught us the truth. Today we're going to look at the Latter-day Saints as they were exercising this faith in Jesus Christ as they tried to make their efforts. It's called Colonization and Reformation. It's much more about the colonization and the Reformation, but I think it's important for us to look at both situations. So we're going to start now.
Colonization during the years of 1847 through 1857 went through two phases. The first phase was what has become known as the inner corridor of settlements.
And this map here that you'll see quite a bit shows the darker part is the inner settlements, and the lighter part is the outer settlements.
In addition to the settlement of the Salt Lake and Weber valleys in 1847 and 1848, colonies were found in Utah, Tooele, and Sand Peak valleys in 1849, Box Elder, Pavant, Juab, and Parowan valleys in 1851, and the Cache Valley in 1856.
So if you're a Latter-day Saint in the 1850s, you would come to Utah, which would require crossing the ocean. Probably most Latter-day Saints live in England, so it would probably require crossing the ocean and then crossing the entire United States. You in Utah, and then find out that you'd be going somewhere else to settle. This was an enormous effort, well organized, well orchestrated, and involved basically following the prophet.
The second phase was an expansion beyond the immediately available cultivatable valleys with a view to ringing the Commonwealth with colonies located at strategic points of interception. Carson Valley, Nevada in 1851, Las Vegas, Muddy Mission, Nevada in 1855, Moab in 1855, Fort Supply and Bridger in Wyoming in 1853 and 1856, and Lehigh in northern Idaho in 1855. This outer corridor embraced almost 1/6 of the area of the present United States.
Went into Idaho, covered all of Utah, went far into Arizona, almost down to the border.
Much more important was the founding of a string of towns stretching from Salt Lake to San Diego, known as the Mormon Corridor.
This was 170 years ago, so none of this exists today, but it was important back then.
The two most important colonies along this route were in Parowan. Parowan Valley was originally known as Little Salt Lake Valley, and San Bernardino, California. The Parowan station served as a halfway station between Salt Lake and San Bernardino and was also the home of the Iron Mission.
Parowan is just a little town today, but at that time it was Little Salt Lake Valley. It was the midpoint between Salt Lake and San Bernardino. It was a really important town.
The San Bernardino settlement was established by 450 families that arrived in June 1851. The colony served as a port of entry for converts coming from the Pacific missions, a gathering place for members of the church in California generally, including those serving gold missions, and a rest and supply station for church missionaries going to and from California and Pacific missions.
Despite how important it was at first, it didn't last very long.
Saints bound for San Bernardino began arriving in Parowan April 11, 1851. However, during the winter of 1858, the settlement at San Bernardino was abandoned by the Saints, and the settlers there were advised to return to Utah. The church had purchased San Bernardino Ranch, consisting of 100,000 acres, for $77,500. In 2020, that would amount to $2,572,074. It was disposed of incident to the Utah War, called Buchanan's Blunder, 1857 to 1858.
Yeah, how true.
Approximately 96 towns were established in the first decade.
That's quite a few cities, if you ask me.
The process by which these colonies were planted and nurtured demonstrates the manner in which church members attempted to translate early ideals into concrete institutions.
The process by which these colonies were planted and nurtured demonstrates the manner in which church members attempted to translate early ideals into concrete institutions, in Utah no less.
A three-phase sequence was involved. Number one, preliminary exploration under the direction and support of church leaders. Number two, a colonizing company appointed to the settlement. Number three, the company was expected to pattern their community after Salt Lake, which was patterned after the city of Zion Platte.
Much of this work was done by Party Pratt, who was sent out by Brigham Young to scout these different places out. Once they found a place they could stay, they would colonize it and try to make it look like Salt Lake City. This all happened incident to the Walkara War of 1864.
Originally, Chief Walkara, also known as Walker or Walkar, in 1849, invited Brigham Young to send 50 Mormon families to settle Sanpete County in order to teach his people the arts of agriculture and home building. These Latter-day Saints came to establish a theocracy.
Now, one thing that the Indians didn't know was they were inviting people to come and settle there that were living the law of consecration. They're coming to establish a theocracy, and this did not fit with the Indians' plans.
With Old Testament prophecy and New Testament promises as revealed in the restored gospel, they espoused principles of Jeffersonian democracy in the midst of their theocracy.
This is interesting, isn't it? The Old Testament promises and New Testament promises were established in the midst of a theocracy.
Unlike other Western colonies, which were based on the exploitation of resources, this community was based on an agricultural commonwealth inspired by faith in church leadership.
Now that's quite interesting, isn't it?
However, it soon became apparent that Chief Walkara's motivation may have been to obtain cattle for his people. After the extinction of Utah's buffalo herds, Walkara had to travel as far as the Great Plains for big game. A permanent settlement of whites, he knew, would surely include herds of cattle, which would feed his people without the need for extensive hunting excursions.
So this is supposed to play out really well for the Indians.
On Brigham Young's part, the appeal of a friendly invitation reinforced his determination to establish Zion in the wilderness, with a further possibility of winning converts among the Lamanites. Much of the trouble that later arose between Latter-day Saints and the Utes resulted from the Indians' ignorance of the white man's sense of individual property rights. To the Indians, the land belonged to no one, which allowed them to hunt anywhere for any game. As the white settlers plowed and partitioned off the land, the Ute Indians faced extinction within 1 year of the WS arrival.
The Western Saints arrival.
Realizing this, the white settlers attempted to help them adapt to white culture, agriculture, irrigation, education, and welfare support. However, adaptation to white man's ways was unrealistic and never materialized.
And still hasn't materialized today with those Indians on our south of us on the reservations.
Another point of contention was the regular practice of the Utes to sell members of opposing tribes they had been victorious over into Mexican slavery. The white settlers would not only not allow that, they took the victims of Ute Indian aggression against other tribes in and cared for them. Whatever the reason, by 1853, relations between Chief Walkara, along with other tribal chiefs, and the Latter-day Saints had degenerated to the degree that in May of 1854, Governor Young traveled to Parowan, Utah, with an entourage of civic and church leaders to meet with Chief Walkara in hopes of making peace.
I think it's important for us to stop now and understand that we were going different directions. We wanted to establish Zion, that's going this way. They were just looking for liberty, that's going that way. So this meeting, although it ended positively for us, did not end positively for them. I'll read. Walkara sat in his buffalo robe, wrapped in his blanket, with the old chiefs around him. He did not rise, but held out his hand to Governor Young and made room for him by his side. After the ceremony, shaking hands all around, Arthur and Mr. Huntington made known the object of the governor's visit and hoped that the calendar of peace would be smoked and no more cause would be given on either side for a continuation of ill-feeling. Of course, that's what we hoped for. 5 minutes of intense silence prevailed when an old gray-haired Utah chief got up, and in an effort his blanket slipped from his body, displaying innumerable marks of wounds and scars. Physiologist of the best spoke as follows. I am for war. I never will lay down my rifle and tomahawk. Americans have no truth. Americans killing in plenty. Americans seeing the woman he shoot like deer. Americans no meat Indian to fight. You have no mercy. When you're gone, Mormons say that no more killing, more Indian, Mormon tell no truth. Plenty Utahns gone to Great Spirit. Mormon kill them, no friend to Americans more. Chief of the 7 Indians rose and teared down his last furrowed cheeks as he gave orders to his grievances. He said, quote, my son was a brave chief. He was so good to his old father and mother. One day, Wayosha was hunting rabbits for food, and his old parent, the rifle of the white man, killed him. The night came when he no come, his old mother went to look for her son. She worked along with the thick brushes on the day. As the dawn of the day, the mother and the son were both away, and then from an age, warrior was lonely. He followed the trail of his wife into the bush, and there he found the mother of his child laying over the body of Wayosha, both dead from the same bullet. The old man met her son, and while they were returning home, a bullet from the rifle of America shot them down both. He added, old Sam beat no can't fight more. His head trembles, his eyes are dim. The murder of his wife and brave Wayosha is still living. Sam beat no more making peace with Americans. The old warrior sat down in his last to make it Walkara remained perfectly sad. Governor Young asked him to talk. He shook his head and said no. After the rest had spoken, some of them were for peace. Walkara said, I got no heart to speak. No can talk today. Tonight, Walkara talked with his rich tomorrow, Walkara talked with the governor. The next morning, the council assembled, and the governor commenced by telling the chiefs that he wanted to be friends with all the Indians. He loved them like a father, and would always give them plenty of clothes and good food. Friday, they did not fight and slay many more white men. He brought us with us down 16 head of oxen, he says a large lot of clothing and considerable ammunition. The oxen were all driven into Walkara's camp, and then decided that maybe the chiefs were more friendly. Walkara, who was a man of imposing appearance, was on this occasion attired with only a deerskin and a shirt. Although it was very old, his blue blanket lay at his side. He lay careworn and haggard as well as follows, quote, Walkara has heard all the talk of the good Warren chief. Walkara no like to go to war with him. Sometime Walkara take his young men and go far away to sell horses. When he is absent, then Americans come and kill his wife and children. When I come fight when Walkara is at home, Walkara is accused of killing Captain Gunnison. Walkara did not. Walkara was 300 miles away when America chief was slain. America soldier hunter. Walkara to kill him, but no find him. Walkara heard. Walkara go home. When Americans take Walkara, he is unarmed. Walkara very sore. Americans killed partly an Indian chief and partly a woman. Partly young women with watched well from Americans and killing because they were enemy peace. Walkara loved Mormon chief, he's a good man. When Mormon first come to live in Walkara's land, Walkara gave him welcome. He gave Walkara plenty of bread and clothes to cover his wife and children. Walkara no one to fight Mormon chief, very good man. He brings plenty of oxen to Walkara. Walkara talked last night to Payadi, to Kehutan, Sunbeat, Paravan. All he needs to know about Mormons and Americans more. Feeding his skill of again while Walkara making how. Killing pieces again handed around all the particles of smoke, the council was then dissolved. So we see here is the Indians who were supposed to be the Lamanites who were going to preach the gospel, they were suffering at the hands of the Mormons. Brigham could see this and he took off through the rest of his time trying to convince the Mormons to be nice to the Indians.
As Brigham continued south with his party of church leaders and missionaries, he spoke to settlement after settlement about the Indians. The Lord has told me it is the duty of this people to save the remnants of the house of Israel who are our brethren, Brigham told one congregation. He reminded them that many saints before coming west had prophesied or seen visions of sharing the gospel with the Indians and teaching them skills like sowing and farming. But now these same people wanted nothing to do with the Indians. The time has come, he declared, that you will have to carry out that which you have seen years and years ago. The endowment house was a simple, unadorned building with solid adobe walls, 4 chimneys, and a sandstone foundation. Inside the house was divided into several rooms for the endowment and seating ordinances. Brigham Young convened the dedicatory service on the top floor, and Heber Kimball offered a dedicatory prayer. When the prayer was finished, Brigham pronounced the structure clean and declared it to be the house of the Lord.
So a long time before the temple was finished in Salt Lake, he didn't know house to perform ordinances.
The midwinter of 1854 through 1855 had created drought conditions across the Utah Territory, which depended on runoff from heavy mountain snowfall to replenish its streams and rivers. As weeks passed and little rain fell, the land in the valley grew drier, killing crops the saints had planted earlier that year. As weeks passed and little rain fell, land in the valley grew drier. Irrigation ditches started to dry out and crack. To make matters worse, hordes of grasshoppers infested the settlements, devouring the meager crops and ruining the prospects for a good harvest. The saints in Sugar House and other settlements tried to plant more seeds, but the drought made cultivation difficult, and the grasshoppers kept coming. Trial after trial seemed to follow the saints, and it was anyone's guess how the drought and infestation would affect the saints.
So terrible.
At Mormon Grove, the immigrating saints found temporary work to earn money to purchase oxen, wagons, and supplies for the journey west. They were also organized into companies. Most of them had never driven oxen before, and sometimes it took 4 men to keep 2 oxen moving in a straight line. More concerning was the health of the company. Immigrating saints usually had few, if any, deaths in their companies, but on the first day out, a man in the Seacrest Company died of cholera. 8 more deaths followed over the next 2 weeks. The elders in the camp fasted and gave blessings of healing and comfort to the sick, but cholera continued to claim more lives.
This is just a story of one group that's crossing the plains to come to Utah. But it's pretty indicative of the stories of everyone.
On September 6th, they climbed the last mountain pass and camped beside a stream a short distance from their destination. The next morning, the immigrants washed themselves and put on clean clothes in preparation for their arrival in the Salt Lake Valley. They traveled the last few miles full of hope, eager to see the place they had heard so much about. But as they entered the valley, they did not see a Garden of Eden. They found a drought-stricken basin covered in sagebrush, bone-white salt beds, and grasshoppers as far as the eye could see. Calls to found new colonies were usually issued during General Conference.
So not only did you enter Slave Valley, which was a desert, you went to conference then and were sent out to some other place to start the Mormon colony. And you've been in Utah, you've seen it. There's not very many places that are green.
Brigham Young would announce these calls, which were seen as a test of religious commitment, over the pulpit or by letter from his personal secretary, Thomas Bullock. The leaders of these colonies were carefully selected and served as both the political and spiritual leaders, often for decades, as bishops, stake presidents, etc.
I'm old enough that I remember my bishop was called for 36 years. That's what he used to do in the church.
Interestingly, when formally organized, the church's larger unit was called a branch, which then had several wards. For example, in Parowan, the church was organized into 4 wards called the 1st, 2nd, 3rd, and 4th, each with a bishop. The larger unit was called the Louisa branch, named after one of Brigham Young's plural wives.
How do you like that?
As new areas were approved for colonization, like a thunderbolt out of the sky, the news sent men wondering who would be called to go and where. The women, wide-eyed with expected dangers ahead, hoped upon hope that it would not be them.
I can totally see that.
After a long march across the continent, those who came early had managed to build a semblance of security and comfort. And if a call came again, it would take faith, great faith in their leaders, and dauntless courage to brave another march into the unknown. But even so, they knew that when the call came, they would go, even to the ends of the earth if need be, if God so willed it.
Such great faith. Such great faith.
Greater faith has never been shown than that of modern Israel on their march west. For theirs was a faith more than faith. It was the will to do.
I think you might be able to imagine just for a minute how difficult it would have been to cross the ocean and then cross the continent, come to Utah, probably not speaking English, be sent out somewhere to start a new colony in this deserty place we live. These people truly had faith.
The Latter-day Saint colonization during the decade of the 1850s was characterized by confident ecclesiastical mobilization of human, capital, and natural resources for the greater benefit of Zion. It was the scriptural principles of consecration and stewardship which most differentiated Latter-day Saints from other American contemporary frontiersmen and entrepreneurs, in which each member looked to the church to establish the conditions which would assure the use of all labor and property to build the kingdom.
That's a well-written sentence. Let me repeat it. It was the scriptural principles of consecration and stewardship. But remember, these people have not been in the temple yet, so they haven't made these commands in the temple. From other American contemporary frontiers and entrepreneurs, which with each member looked to the church to establish the conditions which would assure the use of all labor and property to build the kingdom. This was truly a consecrated people.
The colonization was very successful because it was priesthood directed. The unsung heroines of this colonization effort were the women.
There's no two ways about that.
Women colonists did nearly as many traditionally male jobs as they did domestic chores, digging ditches, building homes, planting, harvesting, milking cows, etc. In addition, they often did it without the help of husbands or older sons because they were called on missions.
Can you imagine? Living during this time, this is amazing.
The two recurring themes in Latter-day Saint history during the first 2 decades after 1847
Listen close to this. This is important.
Are the economic stimulus provided by such windfalls as the gold rush and the mining trade, and the triumph of inspired leadership and organization over the many obstacles presented by desert colonization. The region they settled had plagues without number and hardships without end, but the way they mobilized labor and capital was sufficient to transform the desert into a growing, thriving gospel kingdom.
I think one of the things we forget sometimes is that these people all came from green areas. Europe was green. The Western, the Eastern United States was green. They came here to the desert and they didn't even know how to survive, but they did it anyway. They did it for us. We are so blessed.
The transformation of a Welsh coal miner into a seasoned desert colonizer required some immediate period of adjustment and training.
That's the understanding of the year words right there.
Moreover, the building of the kingdom required the construction of buildings and the establishment of enterprises which individuals or private sectors of the economy could not be depended upon to provide. Church public works served the dual purpose of building the kingdom and providing gainful employment to the newly arrived immigrants, while they were becoming adjusted to the problems of the frontier desert.
These are all understatements, not overstatements. It was so difficult. They did it anyway. They did it because they loved the Lord and they loved the kingdom. This is truly a miracle story.
In some cases, private enterprise could be relied on, but this was not typical. Pottery, paper, sugar factories, iron, wool, and cotton were established and operated by church entities and missions were called to mine coal, iron, and lead. All of these industries were promoted by the church for reasons of self-sufficiency. Tithing resources were used when necessary to initiate them and ensure their continued operation. The Desert Pottery Company was started in 1851, but discontinued in 1853 because of a lack of wood for the kilns.
In this desert place, there wasn't a lot of wood.
A paper mill which successfully published the Deseret News using old rags collected from rag drives. Sugar beet seed was first obtained in 1850 from Congress, and later in 1852 from England, with fabrication machinery also arriving in 1852. Repeated attempts were made but failed miserably. Losses to the church and its investors by 1856 were estimated at $100,000.
In 1856 money, that's a lot of money.
Whatever the reason for failure, chemical, mechanical, financial, or administrative, the enterprise demonstrated that sugar beets could be produced in Utah, and a successful establishment of a beet sugar factory eventually occurred in Lehi in 1890. Although many attempts were made to establish a large-scale territorial wool manufacturing industry, due to the lack of sheep, severity of winters, wolves, and disease, as well as a population large enough to support the product. In 1851, an iron mission was established in Parowan, with a number of persons who were experienced in mining coal and working with iron. Brigham Young instructed missionaries in England to send qualified men and necessary equipment to Utah. As instructed, Franklin D. Richards and Erastus Snow, the two presiding apostles in the British and Scandinavian missions, secured funds with the assistance of several iron masters and arranged for the purchase and transportation of the required machinery.
Quite enough for sure.
As a result of their work, Erastus Snow and Franklin Richards were called home and sent to Cedar City in 1852 to manage the newly formed Deseret Iron Company. The success of the iron company caught the attention and excitement of investors and statesmen alike, and the territorial legislature incorporated the company and advanced $5,000 to help with startup costs. A rich vein of coal was providentially discovered 7 miles east of Cedar City, and for a time produced 100 tons per week. Despite the positive forward-moving inertia, disaster struck in Parowan. First, ironworks were suspended to build fortifications for the Indian War, followed by a terrible flood, which swept down Coal Creek, carrying before it all bridges, dams, and sweeping away all the company's equipment. The remainder of the year was consumed in rebuilding with no production and no profit.
Now the question would be asked today, oh my heck, why would we follow these leaders? They're not inspired. That would be the question we would ask today. Back then, they didn't look at it that way. They just looked at it as hard times and nature and things happen. They did not question their leaders. That's another difference between those people and the people that we have today.
The first presidency refused requests to be released from the Iron Mission, and in 1854, rebuilding commenced. Despite losses and setbacks, the first presidency and territorial legislature continued to pour money and support into the Iron Company. The company continued to experience unexpected setbacks from 1855 to 1858, until, despite 10 years of labor and $150,000 in expenditure efforts, the ironworks were officially closed. After discovering an outcropping of lead 30 miles southwest of Las Vegas, Brigham Young called several men and their families to head the lead mission. Despite successfully smelting 9,000 pounds of lead in 1856, that was then sent to Salt Lake, where it was made into bullets by Church Public Works. In 1857, the lead missionaries abandoned the mission as unprofitable because of impurities in the ore. Later, it was discovered by non-Mormons that the impurities in the ore was actually high-grade silver.
Hey, like that.
Latter-day Saints emphatically believe that the responsibility for the successful establishment and operation of the kingdom rested in the church. The Latter-day Saint idea of a businessman, in short, was not a capitalistic profit calculator, but an appointed overseer of a part of the kingdom. It was this collective entrepreneurship and administration which saved the Great Basin Kingdom from the oblivion which seemed inevitable when so many of its major projects fell through. It was also this unity and cooperation which ran counter to the individualistic tendencies of the nation and led to the eventual undoing of church economic separatism.
Let me just talk about this for a second. It was the collective following of this that kept the kingdom alive. But it was also the unity and cooperation that ran counter to the tendencies that led to the eventual demise of this economic system.
The failure of the pottery, paper, sugar, wool, iron, and lead enterprises resulted in the waste of human and capital resources. In addition, natural disasters, grasshopper invasions, hard winters, droughts, and conflicts with the Indians also took their toll. Of course, church leaders did not know their development programs would fail. However, their focus on becoming regionally self-sufficient led instead of the underdevelopment of agriculture. Despite this, they were able to survive and support a large immigrant population through tithing.
Through tithing. The whole thing's a miracle. Let me just chat to you for a minute about tithing.
Member donated 5 kinds of tithing to the church.
Nowadays, we only donate one kind, but back then they donated 5 different kinds. This is amazing.
Number 1, property tithing, which was 10% of the value of property owned and was usually paid in cash or livestock.
We don't pay this kind of tithing anymore.
Number 2, labor tithing, which consisted of donating 1 in every 10 working days towards various church projects like roads, buildings, temples, etc.
We don't live this kind of tithing either. Number 3.
Number 3, produce or stock tithing, which was 1/10 yield of household, farm, ranch, factory, or mine production. Number 4, cash tithing, which included donations of U.S. coin and currency or gold dust.
Finally,
Number 5, institutional tithing, which was 1/10 of the value of a store, shop, or factory.
the only kind of tithing that is really persistent through our days, number 3, we pay a tenth of our total income or produce, but we don't pay the other kinds of tithing.
The resiliency, the rebound power of the Latter-day Saints was perhaps their greatest asset to develop the pockets of agricultural and mineral wealth in the Great Basin. Whether it was grasshoppers, drought, Indians, or hard winters, the Latter-day Saints always seemed to rise from their beds of affliction to meet the almost overwhelming challenges. Interestingly, these challenges had a greater spiritual effect on the saints, which led to the Reformation of 1856 to 1857.
It's a really kind way of saying it was really hard to make it, and so they lost track of some of their spiritual duties.
It became common practice beginning in 1855 and onward to deed one's property, land, and possessions over to Brigham Young on behalf of the church. Between 1855 and 1857, for example, 2,682 recorded deeds have been discovered in official county records that assign personal property or assets, or both, to Brigham Young as trustee for the church.
2,682,000, that's a lot.
Significantly, there is no evidence of any of these transactions, including any money, either direction.
They were just donated.
The first recorded sermons addressing this were delivered in the 1854 April Conference. These addresses, delivered by Brigham Young, Heber C. Kimball, and Bishop Edward Hunter, were followed by a letter in form of an epistle to all the world, counseling the saints to consecrate their substances unto the church and receive inheritances at the hands of the bishops. The letter asserts that the saints flock by the hundreds and thousands to deed everything they possess to the church in order to receive inheritances from their bishops. Despite the willing consecration of about 1/3 to 1/2 of total families, the church did not take action to acquire the properties, despite possessing the deeds at this time. What is more, the subsequent assigning of inheritances or stewardships did not materialize.
When you only have 1/3, 1/2 of the total membership of the church participating, it's kind of hard to do it.
Rather, private landholding, along with the laws of tithes and offerings, persisted through the 1850s and 1860s. Brigham Young himself, also believing in reaping the rewards of personal industry, did not take action on his own private landholdings during this time period.
So even though over 2,000 members of the church donated their property, Brigham himself did not.
Many suffer from poverty and a general laxity in keeping the commandments due to the psychological, emotional, and physical strain of colonizing the West.
That's an important sentence. It wasn't because they weren't good members of the church, it was because it was hard.
Priesthood is extended to boys for the first time, and block or word teaching instituted. The economic struggles of the saints blamed on general focus on temporal versus spiritual concerns. In 1856, the first presidency commenced a reform movement. Leaders traveled throughout the territory, preaching repentance with unprecedented fervor. Although many saints lived righteous lives, church leaders were concerned that too many saints were not actively striving to become a Zion people or to prepare for the second coming. They worried as well about the influence of those in the territory who did not belong to the church, the weak faith and commitment among some immigrants, and those who had left the church and now fought against it. Jedediah Grant, second counselor in the first presidency, led reform efforts under Brigham Young's direction. Beginning in early September, Jedediah urged the saints to forsake evil and be rebaptized to renew their covenants and remit their sins. Soon other church leaders joined him, spreading the message far and wide until the spirit of Reformation filled the air. Their sermons were often fiery. "I am speaking to you in the name of Israel's God," Jedediah proclaimed in Salt Lake City on September 21st. "You need to be baptized and washed clean from your sins, from your backslidings, from your apostasies, from your filthiness, from your lying, from your swearing, from your lusts, and from everything that is evil before the God of Israel." The Reformation had a positive effect upon most of the saints. Some left the territory because of harsh preaching and perceived threats. Religion and moral practices once again took prominence in their lives.
As I've done research in my own family, I've discovered that while all my family was members of the church when they came to Utah, by the time my mother was born, none of the members of the family were members of the church. They all left the church because of this difficult time. So the Reformation was really important, and it helped some families, although it didn't help mine. My mother was a convert.
Since September, church leaders have been rebaptizing penitent saints in any nearby pool of water, even if they had to break ice to do it. The first presidency, moreover, had instructed bishops to stop administering the sacrament in their wards until more saints were rebaptized and proved their willingness to keep their covenants. To encourage righteousness, church leaders admonished the saints to confess their sins publicly at ward meetings. Christmas passed, and the New Year's Day soon followed it. One reported there was no excitement. Although the saints normally enjoyed large dances and parties during the holidays, church leaders had discouraged such festivities this year. The moral reformation Jedediah Grant had started the previous fall was still underway, and such celebrations were deemed inappropriate. Since September, church leaders had been rebaptizing penitent saints in any nearby pool of water. The first presidency, moreover, had instructed bishops to stop administering the sacrament in their wards until more saints were rebaptized and proved their willingness to keep their covenants. Some men were also called as home missionaries to visit with families in the church. During these visits, the missionaries asked a set of formal questions to learn how well family members kept the Ten Commandments, love one another and their neighbors, and worship with their ward members. As they encouraged greater righteousness, church leaders called on more men and women to practice plural marriage. By the spring of 1857, Brigham Young and other church leaders were pleased with the saints' reformation and reinstituted the sacrament throughout the church. Yet some problems had arisen during the Reformation. Leaders had spoken harshly of apostates and locals who were not members of the church. Feeling intimidated, some people left the territory. Bishops, home missionaries, and church members also clashed sometimes when frequent home visits and public confessions proved embarrassing, disruptive, or intimidating. With time, church leaders began encouraging that interviews and confessions be done in private. As they encouraged greater righteousness, church leaders called on more men and women to practice plural marriage. Soon after the Reformation began, Brigham Young urged church leaders to marry a second wife. But if the Lord wanted them to obey the principle, then they preferred to get the marriage ceremony over. They preferred to get the marriage ceremony over with as soon as possible. Perhaps living the principle would be easier afterward. As their season of reformation wound down, the saints once again grew frustrated with the federally appointed officials in the territorial government. Early in 1857, Utah's legislature petitioned James Buchanan, the newly elected president of the United States, to grant them greater freedom to appoint their own government leaders. We will resist any attempt of government officials to set at naught our territorial laws, they warned, or to impose upon those which are inapplicable and of right not in force in this territory. The local government officials, meanwhile, were equally frustrated with the saints' disdain toward outsiders, intimidation of federally appointed leaders, and lack of separation of church and state in the territorial government. In March, some officials resigned their appointments and returned east with stories of the saints' plural marriages and seemingly undemocratic government.
And so we see that as the church continues to struggle in the West, the struggles continue to increase. And we'll learn more about this next time. I just want to wish everybody a Merry Christmas and a Happy New Year. Say that in the name of Jesus Christ, amen.
That was interesting. I've never heard of all that stuff.